Hey everyone and welcome back. Now in the earlier video we were discussing about the basics of the Consul Connect and the overall architecture and some of the benefits that this specific Consul Connect allows us to achieve, primarily related to the encrypted communication between the network as well as achieve a required level of authorization between service to service communication. This is also very important. So in today's video we'll go ahead and implement this architecture from scratch. So to keep things simple, we'll be launching both of these service, which is the front end service and the back end service within the Consul 01 instance itself. So the architecture will be something similar to this. We'll be making use of Nginx for both the front end as well as the back end service. So a client will connect to the front end service on port 8080. Front end service, since it is configured to connect with the backend service, it will send the request that it receives from this client to port 5000 of this sidecar proxy. Sidecar proxy, when it receives the request, it forwards it to another sidecar proxy, and the second sidecar proxy will go ahead and send it to the backend service. So this is the architecture. Once we have this architecture set up, we'll also look into the intention on how we can go ahead and allow and deny the access. So let's get started. Now to keep things simple, we'll be running the Consul agent within the development mode. So first, let's quickly verify if you have configured the Consul with systemctl. Let's go ahead and stop the Consul over here. That's great. Now few more important things that you have to ensure, specifically if you're making use of Red Hat based system, is you have to ensure that the SE Linux is either within the permissive state or disabled state. So let's disable it. And also if you quickly do a get enforce command, if you see something like enforcing, just set it to 0. So now if you do a get enforce, you will now see permissive. This is primarily because our sidecar and our service will be initiating a connection to various ports like 5000, 9080, and SE Linux will create a trouble there. Second thing that you have to verify is Nginx is up and running. So first let's go ahead and install Nginx here. That's great. So within the Nginx, let's quickly go to a directory of etc nginx conf.d, and here we'll create a new file called as services.conf. So here, since our front end service needs to listen on port 8080 and any request that it receives on port 8080 needs to be forwarded to 5000. So this is the first step that we need to do at Nginx level. Second step is that a backend service also needs to listen at port 9080. So we have to configure both of these services at Nginx level. So I already have a required configuration. Now you don't really need to understand things in great detail, but just know that Nginx here, first one associated with the front end service, will listen on port 8080, and any request that it gets, it forwards it to the port 5000 of the localhost over here. So that is what this specific stanza means. Now you have one more stanza. This is specifically for the backend service, and here it is listening on port 9080, and it will go ahead and serve the content that is part of this folder. So let's go ahead and first create both the services in Nginx. So I'll go ahead and paste it. Next thing is our backend service, which is listening on port 9080. Any request that it receives, it will go ahead and it will fetch the contents from this directory and serve it back. So we have to ensure that this directory is created under user share nginx html. So let's quickly go to user share nginx html. We'll go ahead and create a new directory called as backend service, and we'll go inside this directory and we'll say a echo of backend service, and we'll store it to index.html file. That's great. So now let's quickly do a nginx-t to verify if our configuration that we had written is correct or not, and as expected things are working perfectly well. So now you can go ahead and do a systemctl start nginx. That's great. So now if you do a netstat-ntlp, you will see that our Nginx front end service is listening on port 8080 and our backend service is listening on port 9080. So at this stage, If we initiate a connection on port 8080 to the front-end service, this front-end service will send it to localhost port 5000. However, since our sidecar proxies are not configured, this connection will fail. So let me show you. So when you do a curl localhost followed by 8080, you see you immediately get a bad gateway over here. However, our backend service is listening on port 9080. So if this client initiates a connection on port 9080, it will go to the backend service. So to verify, let's change it to 9080, and within the output as expected, you get the backend service here. Now, the second step is to actually create a front end and a backend service. So till now, we only have a Nginx that is listening on 8080 and 9080. You do not really have a service. So service is basically a console concept. So we have to go ahead and create a front end service and a backend service. So let's go a bit down. So next step is to go ahead and create a service definition. So first we'll go ahead and create a service definition for backend service. Now if you look into this, the name is backend service, the port is 9080. You also basically have a health check that is associated with it. So this health check basically sends a GET request on port 9080 to verify if the connection works or not. Now within here, you have an additional stanza of connect of sidecar underscore service. So this will go ahead and initiate this specific sidecar proxy here. So this sidecar proxy will be associated with the backend service. So let's go ahead and copy this up. Let's go to temp directory. Let's create a new file called as backend-service.hcl, and I'll add the contents. I'll do a save. So now let's go ahead and do a console services register, which will go ahead and register the service definition that is part of this file. Alright, so it basically says connection refused primarily because our console is not running. So let's go ahead and start our console agent in dev mode. Let's say client as 0000. That's great. So from a different tab, let's quickly go to the temp directory where a service definition file is present, and let's do a console services register followed by backend-service.hcl. So here you see it states that a backend service has been registered. Now the next step is to go ahead and also register a front-end service. So here the name is front-end service, the port is 8080. You also have this basically service level health check that we'll ignore because we already have discussed about it. Discussing about the connect feature here, you have a sidecar proxy, and within the upstream, the destination name is backend service and the local bind port is 5000. So that basically means is that when the connection is initiated on this local bind port 5000, the destination for the traffic will go to the backend service, which is nothing but this specific highlighted one. So let's go ahead and copy this stanza. Let's create a front end service.hcl. I'll copy the configuration. Once done, let's go ahead and do a console services register, and we'll register the front end service as well. So at this stage, if we quickly open up the console, here you'll see that you have a health check that is failing for both the front end and the back end service. Now do note that at this stage we have created the service in console. However, this sidecar connect proxy are still not created. So by creating a service definition, this sidecar connect proxy will not be created. You will have to explicitly run a command to create it. So let's quickly look into it. So in order to start our sidecar proxy, the command is Consul Connect proxy sidecar for, you specify front end service, and then all the logs will go to temp front end service.log. Similarly, you also go ahead and create a proxy for backend service, and all the logs for this goes to temp backend service.log. So let's go ahead and run this command. So I'll create the first one, and I'll also create the second one here. So now if you quickly do a netstat-ntlp, you will see that there is one more port that is created, and that port is associated with the number of 5000. That's great. So now if you look into the console, both of this service is having the health check of passing. So to verify if everything is working, let's go ahead and first initiate a connection to the front end service over the port of 8080. So let's do a curl localhost followed by 8080. As expected, you are getting the backend service as a response. Similarly, you can also try to directly connect to port 5000 since you're already logged into the server, and similarly you get the backend service over here. Great. So I hope at a high level overview you understood the end-to-end workflow over here. Now second step as we are discussing is the required level of authorization. Now since this is a service to service communication, with the help of intention feature you can define if front end service should be able to communicate with a backend or it should not be. So that can be achieved with the help of intentions. So let's go to intentions here. Let's go ahead and create here. So you have a source service, you have a destination service. You can specify which is the source service. In this case, the source service is front end service. So I'll say front end, and the destination service is backend. Now at this stage, our connection is already allowed. So there is nothing for us to see here. So let's go ahead and explicitly set a deny. So now if you do a curl on localhost 8080, immediately you see a bad gateway. And in fact, if you do a curl on 5000 as well, you will not be able to get the appropriate response. And as we are discussing that our connect proxy for the backend service is storing all the logs on this specific path. So let's go ahead and see the logs. So let's do a less on this log path. Let's do a shift G so that we can go down. So here you see that there are a lot of error messages that you see, primarily because the connect proxy of a front end is trying to communicate with the connect proxy of backend. So here you see that the call is denied, the service is backend service, and within the reason it states matched intention, deny default front end service, and this is the direction. So from front end service, the traffic to the backend service is deny, and this is the reason why connection cannot be established here. That's great. So I hope with this you understood the basic workflow of Consul Connect, and we'll go ahead and conclude today's video.